Hey, it's Jeff Sauer here from analyticscourse.net and jefflytics.com, and I'm holding up a jacket that was given to me by Google at the Google Analytics Partner Summit sometime around 2010. And on this jacket is the JavaScript code that runs Google Analytics. Super geeky, super awesome, something that I've been wearing and carrying around with me for a long time, ever since Google gave me this jacket. And actually, it fits into the subject of today's video. Now, today's video is going to be talking about cross-domain tracking in Google Analytics. And as you can probably imagine, cross-domain tracking does have something to do with the way that you set up your JavaScript code in Google Analytics. Now, the JavaScript code that we have in Google Analytics has changed over the years. This is no longer the one that we would be using. This is basically the serialized version of, I think, the ga.js version of Google Analytics that was popular at the time. But the premise is the same, and that is the way you configure your Google Analytics tracking code, as well as some other features inside of Google Analytics, will have an impact as to whether or not you can do what I'd consider to be proper cross-domain tracking in the Google Analytics system. Now, when I say proper, I mean cross-domain tracking that fits your needs. Now, there's no actual right or wrong way to do cross-domain tracking. That's something that people get confused about all the time. They think that Google's doing cross-domain tracking wrong because they're having you refer to yourself, or they're having you give referrals from one subdomain to your main domain. That's not Google's fault, folks. That's probably your fault. And the reason why is you haven't configured Google Analytics to tell them what you want. They can't read your mind. And so in this video, we're going to show you how to make Google be able to read your mind, because you gave them the right data, the right information they need to classify your data properly. So this video is all about cross-domain tracking, making sure that you don't have as many referrals from your subdomains or other domains. How do you set it up properly? And then how do you give Google a freaking clue as to what you want to do? Because that's what this is all about. No more reading minds. Let's do this the right way. Let's talk about cross-domain tracking in Google Analytics. Watch on to see my best tips and my best troubleshooting tips for fixing any cross-domain tracking issues that you have. So let's talk about cross-domain tracking in Google Analytics. Now, for most websites, when you use Google Analytics, the tracking just works. You basically put it on your website, and the concept of your website is one domain name and one installation of your content management system, one graphic design, one user experience for everybody. That's the majority of websites that are out there. So, for example, jefflytics.com, when I first got started and before Analytics course, before PPC course, there was just one website, and it was jefflytics.com. There was no subdomain. There was no other things to worry about. It was just all in one spot. And that's how most people's websites work. That's how blogs work. That's how most websites do things. But of course, as businesses get more complex and as the web gets more complex, we have things like subdomains, or you might have multiple websites that you all want to track together in one space. So Google Analytics works really well until you try to track more than one domain in a single web property. Now I'll show you what that looks like in just a second here, but it works really well until you try to track more than one thing, more than one domain name, essentially. And then your reports can get messy, confusing, and inaccurate. And it can be something that's really frustrating. It's probably the number one question I get from people about Google Analytics is, how do I fix this problem where I don't trust the data that comes into my site? So let me give you a more concrete example. Using the Google Analytics demo account for the Google Store, you can see here that Google's getting a lot of traffic from other Google websites. They're getting traffic from YouTube, the Google Mall, the Google Deals Mall. They're getting it from a certain Google website and from google.com as a referral. And that's not to mention all the other different things they have going on as well. And so Google's getting a lot of traffic from themselves. Now, I'm guessing they have reasons for keeping it this way. Maybe they don't have a problem with their traffic. Maybe they're different enough websites, they don't want to track them together. Maybe there's really no problem in this at all. But when you're an analyst, you might say, okay, well, is G-Deals from Googleplex, is that really bringing us $182,000, or is that incorrect? And so just try to imagine a situation here where you don't want to have a separate tracking mechanism for the Googleplex store than you do for your own store. Maybe you want to treat that all in one spot. Maybe you want to have it all in one domain. If you make that choice, if that's your decision, you want to track things all in one spot, well, this is going to cause a problem for you. And the reason why it's going to cause a problem is that you don't trust this data, and it's actually probably people that came in through a different mechanism of driving traffic. And so you can see there's a very high conversion rate for this gdeals.googleplex.com. It could end up that it's actually a self-referral. It's you referring to yourself, and you don't want to track them separately because it sort of screws up all of your reporting capabilities. So this happens all the time. Now, Google may or may not want to fix this. I'm just using them as an example because it's a widely available data set that we can all look at, and it's something where we can piece together a story as to whether or not this is something they'd want to track. So why does this happen? Why is this a problem? The reason why is something that we've started to call cross-domain tracking, and in particular, maybe a cross-domain tracking issue or some kind of problem with tracking websites across the different domains. Now, more specifically, this is a problem not of Google Analytics. It's not Google's problem. It's your problem or somebody who has multiple websites because you have a lack of a cross-domain tracking strategy. Now, I'm going to defend Google here for a moment. It's not something I always do, but generally speaking, their choices are correct 99% of the time with the way that they run their product. Google Analytics is really smart. Google Analytics is amazing. But they can't read your mind. They don't know how you want to set things up, and their default is that you have one domain name per one web property. And so every property you track is something that's one domain name, and you want to track it separately from the other ones. That's why they give you the ability to create tons of these properties. That's why they don't harp on you when you create only one. That's why they don't tell you need to create more than one. They just assume that you're going to do the right thing for yourself, and that's what they should do because it's a one-size-fits-all tool for millions to hundreds of millions of different websites out there, and so they can't read your mind. And it's up to you to figure out what your strategy is. If you want to combine multiple domain names into one property, then you need to throw Google a freaking bone here. And yes, I'm using an Austin Powers reference to tell you this. And I thought maybe it would make you at least smirk a little bit as you're watching this video because analytics can be super boring and we want to liven it up a little bit. Now, you need to tell Google what you want, what you really, really want. Okay, I can't resist. Analytics can be boring, so I put the Spice Girls in there. Now, if you are watching this video, you can probably guess when I graduated from high school because like the Spice Girls and Austin Powers are popular. If you can nail it down, leave a comment. That'd be pretty funny as well. But basically, you need to tell Google what you want. They don't read your mind. Throw them a freaking bone. Now, here's how you do that in Google Analytics. Here's how you tell Google Analytics what you want and what you want to track. So we're going to go into Google Analytics here, and I'm going to show you my process for fixing cross-domain tracking. Okay, so here we are in Google Analytics, and you can see here that there's the referral traffic coming into the Google Merchandise Store, and we saw that there's YouTube, the Googleplex, and everything like that. Now let's just take a look at some of this traffic that's coming in. So if we go into YouTube, we can see where this traffic is coming from. It's coming from different pages on the YouTube website, and basically it's the footer on certain pages of YouTube. And if we go into YouTube, we can verify that by looking at the About page. See the About page there, and we can see at the bottom that there's a link to this merchandise. And if we were to go to this thing, we would end up being on the Google Merchandise Store, and we'd be coming through YouTube and looking just at the YouTube stuff. And so that's basically how this works. So this referral that comes in there from YouTube is people going to the store by clicking on the link at the bottom of the YouTube website. Now that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And generally speaking, they want to make sure that they track that referral that happens from YouTube to the merchandise store because it's basically a different website sending traffic. They don't necessarily need to move these things all into one spot. But as you can imagine, there's scenarios where the person who runs the Google Merchandise Store wants to properly track all these things, where they want to have it all together. And so if you're going to do that, what you need to do is you need to understand why cross-domain tracking happens the way that it does. So what I've done is I have the Google Analytics debugger turned on, and I look at this thing, and I can run the debugger, and I can see now all the different things that are happening behind the scenes on the Google Merchandise Store when somebody runs. Now you know your Google Analytics debugger is working because you look at the Google Analytics thing here, and that is what it is. It's an ASCII art basically saying Google Analytics. And when I look in here, there's a lot of data, a lot of things going on. They actually send Google Tag Manager hits a ton of different times. You can see like 275. They have a bunch of different custom coding that's happening in here. They're sending data to Google Analytics a ton of times. But what you can look at here is if you go into Google Analytics, you can see that they send a beacon. And that beacon is saying that the host name, basically the host name is shop.googlemerchandisestore.com. And there's all kinds of different things that happen with that host name being there, but the location is here. And essentially, because there's no customization happening, they're just using the standard Google Analytics. A client ID, which is this thing right here, is generated for my browser on the Google Merchandise Store. And as I traverse through this store, I'm treated as that client ID, and then every time that a hit is sent into Google Analytics, which is basically what happens a ton of times on here, that client ID is what's populated, and that's how they know that Jeff had a continuous session on the Google Merchandise Store. So if I went to 10 pages, my client ID wouldn't change. That's how they know who I am. Now the thing is that when I'm on YouTube, if I fire up the debugger there, I can see that I actually have a completely different client ID. So I have a different client ID set to whatever domain name I'm on, and also you can see here that it's www.youtube.com that's in my host name, and so it's treated completely differently. Now that's exactly how it should work because they're two different sites that are tracked differently. But there are cases where you want to track them together. And what you need to do is you need to make some modifications to your tracking code in order to make this work exactly how you want it to work. And so I want to show you how you can do that with your own Google Analytics account. And I'm going to show you how to do that within Google Tag Manager. So here we are in Google Tag Manager. Now I treat these videos like a cooking show, so I've already opened this thing up and I'm in my account. I don't have access to the Google Merchandise Store one, so I'm doing this in the Jeffalytics account. So if you see the word Jeffalytics anywhere, that's what I'm doing here. And you can see that within Google Analytics, I'm going to go to create a new variable, and then what I'm going to choose here is I'm going to choose the Google Analytics settings variable. So we go to Google Analytics settings, and you can see that it's telling me that I have a automatic cookie domain. Now, automatic is almost always good if you have a vanilla installation, you don't have any special needs that you need to account for, you don't have any special rules in your business. If you have a single domain name, the cookie domain name of auto works fine. But any other time, you need to be more specific. And so what you'd probably want to do here is you want to put your domain name to be jeffalytics.com. And that way, everything that has this tracking code, every time that my Google Analytics setting is fired, it's basically my tracking ID, which is a variable. So basically what you want to do is your tracking ID is always the same account ID for Jeffalytics. That's a variable that I've put in there. And then the cookie domain name is always www.jeffalytics.com. Now, if I'm tracking multiple different properties, I would still set the cookie domain name to be jeffalytics.com because it makes it so that it's consistent. And the client ID that gets generated is specific to that person's computer being on jeffalytics.com. So even if it was shop.jeffalytics.com, I'd want to have the manually set cookie domain name. If I was doing jeffalyticsstore.com and I was trying to link them together, I would have this as the same cookie domain name as well. Basically, your primary web property domain is what you're going to want to set for your cookie domain because that's where all these cookies are going to get set, and then your client ID remains the same. Now, this is a little bit tricky. This is pretty advanced as far as things go, but this is what I found you need to do in order to let Google know that this is what you want to track. So you put your primary web property for each of the cookie domain names for every single thing you want to track in Google Analytics. Now you only need to do this if you want to track things individually in one spot, if you want to track everything under one property. If you want to track things differently, if you don't mind having referrals from yourself, then this is not necessary. You can trust the auto setting. Now if you also click on more settings, you'll notice here there's a cross-domain tracking item here within Google Analytics. And you can choose to auto-link your domain names. And so this is where you might say, I want to auto-link these certain domains, and then you'd put in a string of data, basically a CSV of data you want to put in here. So you can see jeffalytics.com, Jeffalytics store. Those are all the different ones that we were just talking about. I can put them in there, and then I would auto-link domains. Now, I found that this can work well. This is a recommended solution that people have told me to do, but it's hard to determine if it's the cookie domain name or the auto-link that is going to make these things work perfectly. So I like to put them both in there. So you want to auto-link your domains and you want to do your cookie domain in here. And that way you can track things together. Now you can also do this in the straight Google Analytics code if you don't have access to Google Tag Manager, or if you've done it the other manual way. What you'd want to do is you'd want to set up your auto-link domain names and look in the documentation for Google Analytics for how you can do that. But I'm not going to talk about that in this video because honestly, it's going to lead to more questions than it answers, and it's something that this is really where you'd want to start working with a consultant if you have specific needs or if things are not working. This cross-domain tracking and getting it all set up properly is one of the things that keeps consultants in business because it's confusing. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's debugging tools. Even though this information, even though these are all free tools, it's just finding somebody with the specialized knowledge to do this that really can be beneficial for you. So this is just an overview of how it works, where you need to set things up, but you still might want to work with a consultant to give you the certainty that you need that this is actually going to work, especially if you have a big site. The bigger the site, the bigger the consideration is for bringing in a consultant. And so as we were going through this, what we'd want to do is we'd want to make sure that everything's triple checked, everything's looking correct, and then we'd want to save this, and then we'd go in and we'd debug our own website, and we would make sure that the client ID is being set, that our cookie domain name is properly being set, and that everything's starting to look good for this website that we want to track. Now, I'm not going to save my progress, and I'm not going to go and do that because this is not on my own site. The Jefflytics site does not have a store URL. Now, if you want to see me do this, and you want to see this in live action where we would debug this and eliminate cross-domain tracking, perhaps if you have a domain name where there's a problem, we could do it in a video. Let me know in the comments. Let me know if you think we should do this for you, and you'd need to be able to give me permission to get into your site, and we'd fix the problem for you. But for now, I just want to show you where you can find the tools. And then the final step you want to do to make sure that everything's working properly is you're going to go into your master view for your main property or whatever property you're looking at, and you're going to go to the referral exclusion list under the tracking info, and you're going to add referral exclusions. Now this is where you do one domain name at a time. Generally speaking, you would just want to put the top level domain. You don't need the subdomain in there. You would just do jefflytics.com or youtube.com or googlemerchandisestore.com. You don't need the subdomain. At least they don't recommend that you do that. And you put this in there, and you have this list of things that you want to exclude. And in theory, it's supposed to make sure that anytime you get a referral, a self-referral, a problem with cross-domain tracking, then it's supposed to work for you. So this is something that you can do to make sure that your traffic reports don't show these cross-domain items. Now what I found is that you'll still get self-referrals if you don't have your cookie domain name set up. If you don't have all those other steps that I talked about in place, then it can still cause problems. And so you want to make sure that you try to do this as clean as possible. And there's actually more steps to cross-domain tracking that you need to look at as well. If you go into Google Tag Manager, it's not just auto-linking your domain names. Whenever you submit a form from one site to another, you're going to want to make sure that you have the cookies being pushed between them. There's a way to do that within Google Tag Manager. There's a lot of different things you need to do, and the more you go into it, basically, if you're having problems with this, you want to go through these things one by one. Generally speaking, if you do this and you do this, then you're going to solve a lot of problems. But if you keep on having problems, especially if you have an e-commerce store and you have a third-party cart software that you're trying to track, then you're probably going to need to work with a consultant in order to get that all in order and to make sure that everything is just working exactly how it's intended. But I just wanted to give you an overview of how I investigate these problems, how I look at things, and how I can determine if you're having a problem that can be fixed or if it's something that you really need to talk to somebody who's a professional to get to that point. And so hopefully that gives you a good overview as to what you want to do with cross-domain tracking if you're experiencing issues. Now these things are really a bigger problem when you're going between top-level domain names. You can have some problems with subdomains, but Google's gotten really good at that. So generally speaking, as long as you have like your cookie domain name is jefflytics.com and that's set, then it shouldn't cause any problems between your subdomains. But sometimes you want to track subdomains separately, so you create a different web property for them. And if you do that, then you want to make sure that you're very explicit with how you set up your domains. So generally speaking, I don't know what your problem is going to be when you go through this, but as you go through them, you need to use the process of elimination to sort of figure out exactly what your problem is. And then once you know what your problem is, implementing a solution becomes easier. So this video is in general about how we diagnose the problem and then a simple way to fix one of the problems. Now, if you have more problems, then let me know, and maybe we can put together another video where we solve your specific problems if these items aren't working here. Okay, so I'm wondering, do you understand cross-domain tracking better now, or is it more confusing? I know it gets confusing. I know it's crazy. I'm probably going to get a lot of comments on this one asking for clarification, and I'll do my best to answer them because, like I said, even if we give you a general way of looking at problems and looking at solutions, your specific problem might be different than what we're seeing in this here video. So let's recap the steps for how we're going to be able to get better at cross-domain tracking. Number one, map out what you want to track on paper. Before you even worry about technology, before you worry about any of that stuff, before you worry about putting code on your site, put it down on paper. The exercise of putting things down on paper is just really beneficial to all of us because we can say, here's what we really want to see. Here's what we want to do. Number two, tell Google Analytics what you want to track so that they can track it. Google can't track what they don't know. Google Analytics is a smart system, but they can't read your mind. So throw them a freaking bone and tell them what you really, really want. Number 3, make sure that your cookie domain name is set consistently. And don't trust auto, especially if you have a situation where you're trying to track more than just the automatic domain name that you have. If you're trying to track more than just your main domain name, auto is probably not going to work for you. Number 4, use GTM to set cookie domains, auto-linking domains in GTM. And then also if you have forms and you have things that you're sharing between different domain names and things aren't working after you do these 2 settings, there's more you can do in Google Tag Manager to solve your specific problem. So generally speaking, Google Tag Manager makes this a lot easier than having to modify the code on your site. It's less prone to errors and it's easier to get it up and running. And using Google's templates basically means that you're using a Google sanctioned way of doing things, as opposed to doing it all willy-nilly or whatever you want to do on a whim. You're using Google's sanctioned methods, and Google's sanctioned methods are generally speaking going to work better than if you try to reinvent the wheel on your own. And number 5, add referral exclusions on your list to be safe. And I'm going to tell you this, cross-domain tracking is not easy. Even after we went through this video and we spent all this time talking about this, I can tell you that it's not easy, and that every time that I look for a solution, I have to go through a set of steps that I go through to see if I can solve it, and then use the process of elimination to say, what is the right solution for this problem? And you're going to have to do the same thing. And that's what keeps consultants in business, because it's not easy and there's a step that you need to go through. And I can't just tell you, here's the magic bullet, here's how you solve it. We need to go through a process of elimination in order to get to the answer that you're looking for. Now, the key to your success is to define the steps that we need to do in order to track this thing down, in order to figure out where the problem is, and then make the updates that you need to make in order to get to this point. And those updates are something where it might take a couple days for the data to come in, but eventually you're going to start to see if your solution worked and if that's the right solution for the problem. Now, if you're having problems with this, or if you just want to let us know what you're doing on your end, leave us a comment to show us how you're implementing cross-domain tracking, any issues that you're having with the way that you do cross-domain tracking, or if you want to make it a case study where we solve your problem in one of these videos, please do leave a comment. You will need to give me access, the access that I need, both to Google Tag Manager and to your analytics account. You're going to need to let us see into what you're doing. We won't share your vital data, but we will share some data. We'll blur out the things that are sensitive. We can do all that stuff. But we would need to go in there and help you fix it. Might make for compelling television. It might be better than resorting to Spice Girls and Austin Powers jokes. I'm not sure. But I have to liven up analytics because analytics can be super boring. And I don't want it to be boring. I want it to be fun for you. And I want you to be able to get what you want. I want you to be able to get the answers that you need as you go through and you analyze what's happening in Google Analytics. And so if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel or to our 90 days updates at jeffalytics.com. And while you're at it, join our free Google Analytics mini course. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. You can see why we love Google Analytics so much. You can see the value of the tool in analytics. You can get all these lessons about certification. You can get all kinds of insights into analytics that maybe isn't intuitive to you. Maybe it demystifies the entire process about analytics. These are things you can do if you join analytics course on the free mini course. And that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this look into Google Analytics. Hopefully you like to see the tools that I use to analyze things. Hopefully you like to see exactly how this stuff works. I like to do a balance between the theory and then the hard-hitting stuff that's inside of Google Analytics. Hopefully you got a little bit of both of that and you're a little bit further along in solving your problem. But like I said, every problem's going to be different. Every situation's unique. And so this is one of those ones where you might want to talk to me and see if we can help you out, or talk to a consultant and see if they can help you out. All right, thanks for listening to this one, and I look forward to talking to you soon, sharing more analytics wisdom and knowledge with you at jeffalytics.com, analyticscourse.net, and in our YouTube channel.